Okay, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the first in Archer's Ask the Expert series. We're glad you could join us. As always, we have a lot going on in our industry. Unfortunately, nothing more is front and center today than COVID-19 or the coronavirus. So we decided to dedicate our first conversation to that topic. Before we get started, a couple quick things. First and foremost, we hope that you and your families, your friends, and your coworkers are all safe and healthy. And secondly, on behalf of Archer, we really want to thank all of you that are joining. You guys are literally keeping the lights on and saving lives. So thank you. Today is really supposed to be conversational, and that conversation may take place in a couple of different ways. You may want to type questions. You may want to raise your hand and ask them live. That's really what we're here for today. We've got some good information we'll share, but really the point here is for this to be very conversational. I'm going to go ahead and get started and go through just a couple of slides to formally introduce Archer for those of you that we may not have worked with in the past. That'll just take a couple of minutes. And as I'm doing that, you can get, if you're not used to using Zoom, there's a couple of ways in which you can interact. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can click raise your hand if you have a question, and I can go ahead and unmute, and we can have a great dialogue. Alternatively, on your screen, I believe it's at the bottom toward the middle, there's a Q&A section. You can type your question, and we'll answer them in the order in which we receive. We'll try and get through all of them today. If by chance we run out of time, we will go through all of them and send a follow-up on all of these. Additionally, we will record this session and we'll post it out to our website once it's complete, and you'll get notification of that being complete as well. So with that, I thank you guys again for joining. Archer is a boutique consulting firm focused heavily on compliance with verticals focused on cybersecurity, physical security in the utility space, oil, water, gas, mining, food processing, all of that. You know, Archer was started almost 6 years ago by 4 partners. Those 4 partners, and I can say this unequivocally, have decades each experience in the industry. They held positions within utilities. They've been ex-auditors in one of the regions and have started Archer to more effectively bring their knowledge and sharing and help to our clients. In addition to the partners that started Archer, we've really focused on bringing in the right knowledge and talent to complement what's there. We've really focused recently on bringing in experienced and credentialed consultants to add to our layer of expertise. It complements our focus on compliance. It also adds deeper knowledge and expertise in our verticals of physical and cybersecurity. Today, we've got 3 panelists that are going to go through and answer your questions. We've got a couple questions that have been emailed to us already, so we can go through those. But again, for those of you that may have just joined, if you have a question, again, this is meant to be conversational. Please raise your hand, ask questions. So bottom right-hand corner, just click raise hand, or go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A section in the bottom, and we'll answer them that way as well. So with that, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll just go directly in order. Patrick, if you would go first.
Morning all, Patrick Miller. I'm one of the managing partners at Archer. As Mark mentioned, yes, former utility person, former regional auditor, former DOE, DHS project stuff, and now consulting with Archer. And wanted to echo Mark's thanks to all the utility folks for what you're doing to keep the lights on for us.
Nick?
Thanks. Good morning, all. I'm Nick Weber, a security and compliance consultant here at Archer. Before that, I managed security and compliance at a small utility in Central Washington. Prior to that time, I spent some time at WEC, did a full lap as a WEC auditor, building on my military and DHS career on both physical and cybersecurity. And I want to echo Patrick's comments as well, thanking everyone for their hard work keeping the lights on.
Excellent. And Stacey.
Hi, Staceyessler here, also a managing partner of Archer. Echoing Patrick and Nick, I come from the utility space. Worked at PacifiCorp for 8 years as the manager of their cybersecurity department. Also went on to WEC to be an auditor and spent some glorious times with regional entities throughout the nation and to help start this CIP program, and also a lot of audits, lots of audits. So I spent a considerable amount of time doing that, and now consulting here with Archer.
Great, thank you, Stacey. Again, everybody, you're joined in listen-only mode. We mean this to be conversational, so if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, or you can go ahead and type them in the Q&A section. As I mentioned, there's a few questions that we have, and I'm going to leverage those as we get started. And Stacey, I'm going to cue this first one up to you, and then the second half over to Patrick. So the first one was, while as a nation, we're in uncharted territory with this pandemic, has the U.S. electric grid ever faced a similar situation? And then Patrick, the second part, which we'll go to you with, is has any other country faced something similar? So Stacey, you first.
Great question. We've had pandemics. We've had planning sessions. I remember working at PacifiCorp where we spent an enormous amount of time working on pandemic discussions and what we would do and building out our business continuity plans. We have not experienced a pandemic like this. This is unique. But we have, as an electric sector, obviously had some severe situations. Patrick may be able to give more details on that. But every unique crisis is something new, right? Where we learn even more and more. We've had hurricanes, we've had, Katrina, we've had outages that have taken out large sections of our grid. So it's not new to the electric grid to have crises, but something that's extended like this would be unique. Patrick, you got something to add there?
Yeah, in my global travels, the closest thing we've seen is there have been some similar arrangements, similar situations, basically, in the Asian area. But by and large, the global scale of this has not been seen, at least not since the early 1900s. Probably the closest thing has been the Spanish flu. Some similarities there in a lot of cases, but there was no, the grid didn't look like it does now. Then it was much different. It was much smaller and not nearly as connected. So I would say from a electric utility perspective, we really haven't seen anything like this. And some of the impacts, that we tested for, as Stacey mentioned, and just like in the US, all the regions that I've been to, they do similar testing. I've watched some of these tests in South America recently. I've seen some of the ones in Europe as well. Everybody who's operating an electric system is kind of prepared in some way for disaster like this. I think some of the bigger challenges that everyone has seen is we plan for things like weather-related outages. We've even planned for things like physical and security-related outages. But in the sense that we've got this kind of shelter-in-place thing, and it's an infection, an infectious agent. What do you do in the event that, for example, you need to isolate the folks in the control center and they can't leave? We've kind of looked at that, but we didn't really get to the state where we needed to do this for 6, 8 months or a year. Most of the scenarios I've seen, it's been, there was a dirty bomb or there was something where they had to shelter in place for a limited amount of time. In most cases, we ran it maybe 4 to 6 months. But in this case, the duration, I think, is a bit, it's added a bit of uncertainty to our models in terms of our planning, even on a global scale.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Stacey. Second question kind of tees off on this a little bit. Nick, I'll direct it toward you with the number of clients that you've been out visiting. Are you seeing utilities leverage their actual playbooks? So there's a lot of planning that goes into events like this, physical, cyber, and natural disasters. Or is this an opportunity that clients are, what does it say here? The clients are creating this for the first time?
I think it's a little bit of both. Fortunately, most everybody has a pandemic plan somewhere they had to dust off and bring up to speed, but it may not have been touched for 5 years or more because maybe they have been looking more at the natural disaster or the storm outage or the security issue. So there's obviously been some technology pieces that come up to speed. I know the compliance and technology folks at utilities, especially the first couple of weeks, were really just jumping, trying to get things done. And I was really impressed with how quick they were able to. Fortunately, with my role being a consultant, being offsite as much as on it, I was already set up, so I was already into that ecosystem. But getting the entire workforce into those ecosystems has been definitely a challenge. We've also seen a bit of it from the regions. We had one client that's been active in an audit situation now, and even the region was a couple of days behind to get up to speed with that. So I think everybody's in the same boat with this. But there's been some good planning done, just a matter of going back to it and a little bit of tweaks. No plan survives first contact, so.
Thanks, Nick. This next question probably gets to the meat of a lot of folks' questions, quite honestly. Is there or will there be compliance relief for NERC compliance? Very direct. So I'll open that one up to whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the short answer is barely, if any. The compliance relief really is, the statements from FERC came out and there's really just like 3 bullets. And the only, their statement really is fairly clear. It's going to be case by case. You need to contact your region. And the only real, I guess, stretch you're going to get or flexibility you're going to get is around the areas where you've got periodic requirements that you can't meet. That's about it in a nutshell. Anybody else want to add?
I could throw in again the client we've got that's going through the audit right now. There's been some more flexibility on timing of things, but for the most part, it's moving forward just like any normal audit. And at present, the intent is even do site visits remotely using technology tools. So, not seeing a whole lot of change from that. Again, it just becomes more of the new normal. I think the regions are going to start to coalesce a little more around their audit approaches on this. But yeah, I think it's going to be minimal at most.
So I was reviewing over the last week just to prepare for this meeting what relief there really is, and you know, the word case by case comes up from every angle, from the regional entities, from NERC, from FERC also. What relief they're going to give is going to be case by case. They're sticking to things like CIP exceptional circumstance, that there is no additional expansion on that term, but they're considering relief in the areas in the O&P side on their training, and then there's some statutory relief we may get on CIP 13, where FERC has a motion in front of them as of yesterday.
Yeah, to add one more piece, I've talked to several of the regional auditors, and I'm hearing from most of the regions. At least I've talked to 4 out of the 6, and they're saying that they're really not postponing any of the audits. They're just changing the way the audit will happen. Much like Nick's mentioned, they're going to use technology to do a site visit, that kind of thing. So there really isn't any change in schedules from what I've seen. It's really just going to be how the audit is performed. It will be likely all off-site for the time being, which may create a different type of kind of administrative overhead, for example, during your audit. So you not only would need to prepare for all the standard audit administrative overhead, and I think, if you've been through an audit, you know what that means, but add to that the possible need for dynamic technology solutions that may or may not work at that moment, right? So you may have to have a backup for what you need to get to the auditor in terms of technology options.
Thanks, Patrick. The next question that just came in, Patrick, you were talking about the remote aspect, and so this question from Brian. Several industries have shifted or tried to shift to an extended virtual work environment to allow more people to work from home. Many utilities previously had remote access and distributed environments. before NERC CIP, and many still do with proper controls. Do you think the current situation may lead more utilities to look at increasing remote access, especially if the situation continues for months? Do you think this will lead to tough risk management decisions to enable more remote access to keep things running? So Stacey, I'll cue that one to you, and then to the rest for commentary.
Yeah, we should just all jump in on this one. Honestly, the remote access for most workers within the utility space is going to increase. This is going to really make the whole industry and all other industries, critical infrastructure or not, to reevaluate their work from home, remote work capabilities and policies around that. So there's no doubt that this is going to put a focus point on remote work. As far as some of the essential components of the electric sector, like control system operators, right now there's really no relief on that unless there's like an extenuating circumstance where you can work with your regional entity or NERC to discuss, what you might need to do if you had a severe staffing issue and were not able to staff up for managing that control room. But I don't see that part changing dramatically. That part is pretty serious when you're dealing with cybersecurity concerns and dealing with the reliability of the grid.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Stacey. The NERC FAQ that was recently released has that direct question in it. Basically, what if I can't staff my control center and need to use interactive remote access? And for those that have been playing the NERC CIP game since the beginning, we've had various compliance application notices and compliance process bulletins and lessons learned, and call it what you want, various forms of guidance from NERC that have been published and then in most cases recanted, that basically say that if you're operating the grid remotely, that's verboten, not allowed. The only type of access for interactive remote access, for example, is really more or less administrative or engineering at best. Operating the system remotely from an operator's perspective is still considered to be basically a non-compliant or definitely a compliance issue, high compliance risk. Now, they did answer the question, as Stacey said, where they talk about extenuating circumstances, but they multiple times they state things like last resort. So in the event that, for example, you did have an extenuating circumstance and it was a situation where you had no choice but to do this, there is still the risk of being non-compliant. You would need to document this basically in an extreme case. You would need to prove this beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was your last resort, that you had no other option. And I would still say by the time you got to that point, you should be having a conversation with your region, letting them know that this is your situation versus just kind of going into this blind and hoping you got all the right documentation in place to prove your case. So I would say, in most cases, the answer is going to be no, but there is kind of an emergency exigent circumstance lever you can pull, but that's going to come with some strings and a lot of overhead. So I would not go into that blindly or without, extreme case or extreme cause.
Great, thanks. Nick, anything else to add?
No, I would just expect to, when you start that conversation up, to have been able to talk through all the other things that you've done to try to prevent getting to that situation, whether it's, we've seen some clients using day shift at the primary and night shift at the backup sites and flipping into a deep clean between. I've even heard of, on a couple other calls, folks going to actually complete 100% quarantine of their operations folks, housing them, feeding them on site. I'd say you probably have to have a pretty good story on what you've done to avoid getting there to have that conversation end in your favor.
Yeah, and Nick, to add to that, basically, whoever set the bar for great performance in this area is basically going to be who you're going to have to outcompete to prove you did everything.
Very good, thank you. The next question we have, will FERC be issuing statutory orders to change new standard effective dates?
The motion that was sent out yesterday from NERC asks for an extension on some CIP standards, some PER standards, some training standards We do know that PER 003 has been suspended until 12/31. As of, I think, 1/1/21, you must be compliant. So there are some extension on things like operator training. From a CIP perspective, the supply chain standards may get postponed by 3 months in terms of their effective date. Again, that's a motion that was submitted by NERC. FERC has yet to approve it. NERC asked FERC to approve it quickly, so we'll see if FERC moves quickly and provides some sort of kind of out-of-band notice on that. Their next meeting isn't for a while, the next open meeting, which is typically where they communicate those results. So we'll see how that works. But right now, there has not been any extension on the CIP standards. There's only been an extension in the PERs that we know of that's been confirmed at this time. And even the ones that are in the queue, there's some additional PERs, and there's a handful of the supply chain standards. None of the other standards have been at least requested to be extended, and none of them have been approved.
Hey, Patrick, you mentioned that the meetings, FERC commission meetings where they do the orders, but they could do that out of band before. If it was expedited, it could be done a different way, right?
Yeah, they've got other options to communicate that without having to do it through the open meeting. I mean, they can issue a release. They can issue a release at any time, frankly. They don't have to go through the open meetings. The open meetings are typically the things that have taken a long time to culminate. But during any sort of an emergency action, even if it's not an emergency action, if they make a decision and they need to make it timely, then they can just release that whenever they need.
One thing that I was thinking about while I was reading that motion, now the motion is for 3 months relief. It's curious to me to know maybe FERC might want to consider even longer or shorter. So, keep that in mind as you're talking through your CIP 13 and associated CIP 5 and CIP 10 work efforts. That still could change. So until what's the proverbial fat lady saying, don't permanently change your project plans.
Right. Real quick, I wanted to add for those that are on the call that are also part of the O&P world, in the submittal from NERC to FERC, they moved to extend. They also moved to extend PRC 2, PRC 25, and PRC 27. Just for those that are playing the O&P game at home.
Great, thank you. Next question that came in. What are some unique solutions or actions you are seeing some of your clients take?
That's a good one. I'm not sure if it's unique, but we are definitely seeing utilities lock down their control rooms where they have the system operators actually living there and going through the proper quarantining associated with that move.
I have seen some communicate with their local hospitals and get a priority on testing their operators as well if needed. So they've kind of pre-planned that path if necessary to get their operators tested, going beyond just obviously the temperature check, that kind of thing. But there was one that had gone so far as to try to get a doctor to come visit them in a kind of a quarantine state where the operators could go to a special room and get tested, and everybody would be cleaned in the process so that they didn't contaminate the operators by performing the testing with a doctor that may themselves be contaminated. So there's been some really interesting approaches. Nick even mentioned one that I've seen a couple of times so far with some clients, is where they're using both the backup and the primary control center and basically alternating shifts and then doing a deep clean of each area, and also quarantining in place where they've got folks that are literally living at the control center. This one so far has been a challenge for some, not for all. Some are prepared for that and others weren't. I mean, almost all control centers I've been to, they've got a kitchen, they've got exercise equipment, they've got plenty of things to entertain themselves, but they don't have things like, lockers and showers and beds for extended use, extended duration use, for example. And even then, some of the situations where, they need additional food supplies, how to make sure those can get in and get cleaned before they get provided. So there's been some interesting approaches that have been taken. And Nick, did you have anything else to add on what you've seen?
Some of the other ones I've seen, just from talking to folks out in the field, they've been doing their tailboards all virtual, still getting the work done in the field, but and then really prioritizing work. If it can be postponed, they're postponing it, but really keeping the social distancing piece for their essential employees, even out in the field on their line crews. Not passing around that clipboard with the same pen for everybody to sign. Those little details like that, it's probably the biggest pieces I've seen.
Yeah, good point. I have heard the same. And unfortunately, I heard the same story from one of the utilities that has had a lineman die from COVID as a result. And it was a sad story to hear.
I've also seen some unique departmental level things to keep morale up. Because working remote, and some people working remote that live at home by themselves, maybe with their dog, it can get a little lonely. So at a department level, to keep the compliance teams together, I've seen some video parties where they're not talking about business. They just have a video conference call just to chat and discuss things and you know, share their stories that are going on. And I think that really is a huge part of maintaining and navigating through your compliance programs, is to keep the spirits up, because this can be daunting at times. Everybody wants an exception. Everybody wants to be relieved of having to do their regulatory obligations. And you sometimes, as a compliance person, are caught in the middle of that. So I think that morale component is really unique and beneficial.
Yeah, great point, Stacey. I think mental health is key in all this. This is an extremely stressful time, and you know, managing a power grid can be stressful enough as it is. But that's very important to make sure your staff are checked on, make sure that they're healthy mentally, they're prepared. If they're stressed out, you know, give them breaks. You might need to basically change things like hours and durations and expectations, of course, just to make sure that everybody is not just physically healthy, but mentally healthy. I also got a back channel message from someone that was talking about the cleaning of the equipment in the control center. They had tried using forms of an alcohol spray on some of the keyboards and found that the keyboards began to malfunction as a result. So be careful at how you're cleaning those items, because you may end up having some equipment failures and not have replacement equipment on hand. That was an interesting back channel message. So be mindful of the fact that
very interesting.
You're using may end up killing some of your electronic devices.
One more thing that I'd like to throw in that I've seen, kind of back to the mental health piece, is I was asked by my University Alumni Association, since they knew I work from home, to write a little do's and don'ts of working from home for those who are new to it. So if you've got folks who do that, or you do have some consultants or somebody who is working remote, reach out to them and ask them to kind of mentor or offer some tips on it, because as both Patrick and Stacey said, there's a lot of mental health pieces that go into it. It's a bit of a shift. So use the resources you've got available. I think a few clients are starting to do that as well, using their existing corporate newsletters or emails or whatever to just share some basic work from home techniques.
Great, thanks you guys. We've had a couple attendees join, so I just wanted to maybe point out, we've got a couple more questions that are in the queue, but if you have a question, you can raise your hand in the bottom right-hand corner. Just raise your hand and I'll unmute you, and we can talk and have a dialogue about the topic. Or you can always type in the bottom center Q&A section. You can just type in your question there as well. So welcome to the new folks that joined us. With that, I'll keep things rolling along. The next question we have is on exceptions. Can you declare a CIP exceptional circumstance for any of the CIP standard requirements? I know we've kind of talked in and around that a little bit, but that was a very good and direct question.
I'll jump in on that one. The quick and dirty answer is no. In the FAQs, they're not, that came from NERC recently, specifically says that they're not extending the applicability of a CIP exceptional circumstance. At current state, it is still only allowable for those requirements in which a CIP exceptional circumstance is stated in the requirement. That said, we still have that work with your regional entity point that's made throughout all these advice and FAQs that we're getting from NERC and FERC and regional entities. If it's really a situation which you cannot mitigate or you cannot work through, contact the regional entities and discuss the situation hopefully before you go and act to avoid a potential self-report.
Yeah, I can add to that, Stacey. I've talked to a couple of regions and asked about their SIP exceptional circumstance concerns, allowances, that kind of thing. There's always been the potential for abuse with a SIP exceptional circumstance, and that's the reason it comes with so much administrative overhead. And there's only a handful of standards that allow it. So you got to read the language of the standard. And if it doesn't say, SIP exceptional circumstance explicitly in the requirement, then it's not allowed for that one. So the reality is there is a likelihood that you may need one. There is also the potential for abuse of them. The regions that I've talked to said they're going to be looking for that. So they're going to be looking for, and thanks, Mark, these are the ones that will allow this on your screen now for the SIP exceptional circumstance. But the regions—
we have two slides there for that.
Yeah. The regions will be looking for, obviously, kind of, not just your, I would say, standard supporting evidence, but probably a little bit more just to prove that there was no additional flexibility exercised to get the SIP exceptional circumstance. Not that you can't take one, but just be prepared to document it well, because right now there is a higher potential for abuse of those and a higher degree of a misunderstanding around where they're allowed and how they can be applied.
Thanks, Patrick. And there's a couple slides that I threw in here as well that has some of this information on there. We'll send these out at the conclusion of this webinar, along with any other links that we have collected from regional entities, NERC and FERC, so that hopefully it's an easy one-stop shop for all of you guys that are on the call. Okay. The last question that I have in the queue is probably, again, we've talked around it a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask it. If there are not provisions for non-compliance, but we still have an emergency situation due to COVID, what are the options? For example, we have an emergency, need to bring on 10 new generation plant workers because our permanent staff have been quarantined. Do I still have to perform the training and background checks when time is of the essence? Who wants that one?
Yeah, I would say there are some.
So,
all right.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, and follow up. There are some allowances for SIP exceptional circumstances in SIP 4. Can you go back a slide, Mark? To slide 5, thanks. As you can see, the requirement part 2.2, 4.1, there are some places where you would have an allowance there, but not across the board for all. So this would be a situation where if that were the case, I've also seen a similar situation where, for example, there may be a union issue where everyone goes on strike due to hazardous working conditions or other reasons. So in the event that you do end up losing like a bunch of people all at once and you've got no other options, you do need to talk to your region about what you can do there. You may be allowed to have some additional allowances, but that's something you'd want to talk to your region about in advance without just relying on it.
Thanks, Patrick. And Stacey, did you have something else, or did Patrick cover it?
No, Patrick covered it. I'm sitting here thinking one of the issues I see at a lot of utilities that they overtrain. So, and they sometimes go over and beyond the SIP requirements as they do their background checks and PRAs and such. So, just look at those parts as well. You may have some flexibilities within your own program in order to just meet the requirements, but, not have to do the excess.
Yeah, Stacey, I did think of a scenario where you could, for example, bring someone in as an escort and escort, qualified staff to perform certain functions for example. So that may be another option where you could have people performing work under an escorted approach as well. So there may be some creative paths within the standard you can still do to maintain compliance, but in the event that you've got, kind of an avalanche of lost staff, and you cannot get creative, definitely reach out to your region and have that conversation. And just a sidebar.
If you use escorts, do the 6 feet plus.
Right. Yeah. But just as a sidebar, for those that are afraid or unwilling to reach out to their region, I would say all regions now have a fairly open door. We'll be sending out the link to the FAQ. Every region has got a kind of a COVID-19 resources page. There's a contact button on all of them. And I've met, most, if not all, of the region's auditors for the CIP space, and even a lot of the O&P folks. They're very open and they're very understanding, and many of them actually come from utilities. So they got a feeling for what you're going through. This isn't going to be, where you're put in the metal chair with a swinging light bulb and a rubber hose kind of treatment. They're likely going to be open, listening, and having a very frank and genuine conversation around what they can do to help you get through this. Because believe it or not, at the end of the day, I know that you may not believe this in some cases, but they all really do want to keep the lights on just like you do. They are really concerned about reliability of the system. And if anybody has the authority to grant flexibility, it's them under these circumstances. Now, remember, they get audited for the decisions that they make, so they're gonna ask for details. It's not going to be a carte blanche, open check kind of situation, but they're certainly flexible and willing to work with you, and they're likely going to be more open to interesting solutions right now than they would ever be at any other time. So the take-home message is, don't be afraid to reach out to your region and have conversations with them. They really are just trying to make sure that everything still stays in motion and the electrons keep moving.
Patrick, you made a good point about documentation indirectly, I think, but this is going to be a documentation situation if you do get into an area where you need to be accepted for something. Keep really good notes of meetings that you have with internally that came to the conclusion that you would need to go ask the regional entity for an exception of some sort. And also any discussions you have with the regional entity, make sure you take good notes. They'll be taking good notes. You should take good notes. Just make sure you guys are all on the same page and have that paper trail for, come a year and a half from now where you are in an audit and you can actually answer why we did something different than we were supposed to.
Wonderful. We've cycled through all of our questions, so I'll just kind of tee it up for everyone. If you've got a last question you want to ask it, go ahead and raise your hand or type it in. But with that, I'll ask Stacey, Patrick, and Nick to kind of just give some final thoughts. And I'll put the slide back to the panelists, and you will see my email address at the bottom. If you end up having a question after the fact, you absolutely can email me directly, and we'll coordinate a response back to you. So let's start with Nick, and we'll go Nick, Stacey, and Patrick in that order. Just kind of some final thoughts. Nick?
Yeah, I would say in addition to keeping your eye on the ball with the lights on right now, the other piece that I'm concerned with, and a number of clients have shared the same concerns with me, is the security openings that are created, for lack of a better term, just by everybody being so focused on COVID-19 and the response. Seeing a lot of bad actors out there, unfortunately, taking advantage of this chaos. Phishing attempts I've heard up as much as 400 or 500%. So stay on top of your folks, particularly the ones working both on-site and remote. I guess everybody, so not particularly anybody, that they need to be aware that even though there's a lot of other things going on, there are still folks who can take advantage for their own means. That's probably my biggest one that I don't think we really hit on today, but it's been my takeaway for just about everybody I've talked to in the industry, is don't lose sight of the security piece.
Thanks, Nick. Stacey?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that and I think talked about this a little bit, is that emotional component to this, the morale issue. I really can't understate how important it is to stay on top of that part of it. Tensions and stress can get to each one of us when we're talking through certain actions, certain things that we need to do. And it can be stressful when you're doing it all remote. And remember, your IT and OT guys are even more stressed about this because they have to keep those machines running. And sometimes they're trying to do it remotely. Sometimes they're the guys that are on site, away from their families during this crisis. So, be patient, try to keep morale up, and that really helps with the overall compliance of your organization. Another point that I wanted to make was FERC is coming out with some of its, expectations and guidance. Remember, there's a difference between FERC has its own regulations too, and they refer back to the ERO for what actions that they're going to be taking. And yes, FERC does approve relief if it's statutorily needed, but EROs and the REs are the ones that are dealing with the CIP and the O&P standards. FERC is dealing with their own regulations that are related to such as dams and hydroelectric and in the nuclear space. So don't confuse those. Make sure you look at those guidance components separately, so you don't get those mixed up. Like FERC has a processes for asking for forgiveness and stuff called no action letters or standard of conduct waivers. Those are FERC related actions, not NERC and ERO and the regional entity actions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stacey. And Patrick.
All right. Sorry, I was making some notes. Yeah. First things first. Read the FAQs. They're trying to put out some guidance, and it's going to be, that's the one place to kind of get normalized information versus kind of one-off. And if you can get the stuff directly from NERC, that's great. Also check with your region, because your region obviously is where the rubber hits the road in terms of your interface. For the multi-regional registered entities, yes, check all of your regions to make sure that you've got their COVID page handy and you can check what they're doing. For example, Texas RE just put out a template for submitting notices to them for the periodic-based standards where you can get some exceptions. And while I'm on that, remember the things that have a period or a frequency that have to occur and you can't meet that because of this virus issue, those are the ones where you're given some flexibility. You're not given flexibility on event-based standards. So that's been clearly communicated in the FAQ as well. So make sure you're still performing all of the event-based stuff as much as you can, obviously, and if you can't, try to talk to your region. But again, read those FAQs. There's a lot of really good information in there. All the links to the regional sites are there as well. We'll have a list of all this coming out at the end of the webinar too. I wanted to add a little bit to Nick's statement about watching the security pieces. If you're following at all in what are really happening in terms of industrial control systems attacks, there have been few, if any, public documented situations where control systems have been attacked directly. Almost all of these come from the business network. In fact, the known blackouts, of course, the ones in the Ukraine, those started from business network connections. Right now, attackers are taking advantage, never waste a good crisis. They're using that to their advantage. So everybody is using things like brand new work from home tools. Things are different. They're not familiar with all these things. They're much, much more likely to click on something bad right now than they would be at any other time. So be sure you're watching your electronic security perimeter. You're doing your monitoring. Don't let your guard down there, because if there is an attack, so far the most documented highest frequency path is through that business network. So as you're ramping up all of your work from home folks doing things on the business network, now's the time to really be paying attention to what's happening at your ESP, just to make sure there's nothing bad going on, because it would be really bad to take out the lights in the middle of this. The last piece is, if you do submit something that is one of the basically the periodic notices, or you communicate with your region, be mindful that if you're communicating something that is a self-report in there, that still should be a self-report. I'm getting some conversations with regional auditors that are concerned that they're, if it's a self-report, it should still be submitted as a self-report instead of trying to use the exception path in situations where it wouldn't be appropriate. So again, that's probably another conversation with the region. I can't stress that enough. Have that with them first before you decide which path you should take in terms of reporting something. And it's okay. It's okay to have that conversation with the regions. I can't stress that one enough as well. Now's the time to reach out and make good relationships and make friends with your regional auditors and enforcement staff so that you can basically navigate this the best way without running afoul of anything and end up with a bigger issue come audit time because it wasn't handled right now. And to follow Stacey's point, document everything in the process. We're going to be moving really fast through this in a lot of cases. And if we're not writing down what we did, for lots of reasons, we've got selective memory and it's going to be challenging come audit time or even spot check time or self-report time later down the road to remember all of the moving parts that happened during this window. But other than that, stay healthy, do the right thing, stay put, stay inside, cover your face, wash your hands, all those things that you're getting from the authorities like CDC. Don't, take it seriously. We've got a really, really, really important system to keep running. So by all means, do whatever it takes to make sure the lights stay on.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for everyone that attended today. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we'll send all of this information out to the attendees. It'll be posted on our website as well. Thank you to the panelists for taking time to go through all of this. We are always open to recommended topics. You will all be receiving, we've got approximately 9 more topics we're going to send out. We'll send out the full schedule this week. You'll see all of that. Some of them NERC CIP, some of them operations and planning, some of them general business. Send us any recommendations, and if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. I put it back on the pictures. My email address is on there. Any way that Archer can help support you, let us know. Have a great day, everyone. Take care and stay healthy.